In 2013, when FORUMZFD and PECOJON, the Peace and Conflict Journalism Network, came together to put up this conflict-sensitive journalism workshop, the goal was to teach teachers, to teach the learners this framework of journalism.
Previously, may mga meetings with PECOJON, Peace and Conflict Journalism Network. They have this series of training on CSJ, more on media practitioners ang kanilang participants or audience. So why not? They thought that we can collaborate, work together, and try to integrate also conflict-sensitive journalism sa higher education institutions, so with educators. So because we have that experience, they have that framework, and then we try to conceptualize that project together.
In the beginning, there was no Media Educators of Mindanao, no? There were only teachers coming from many different schools, colleges, universities here in Davao to be trained on the framework of conflict-sensitive journalism.
This framework is really about being sensitive to conflict. It's an approach to journalism that will really prevent you from falling into the traps of sensationalism, disinformation, all of that. It's like you're reprogramming how you do media.
The basis of coming up with the CSJ tools, these are parang practice of the media, when they cover war, they usually focus on the war, the conflict. Nothing in the journalism school that talks about how to de-escalate conflict.
By training this group of teachers, the CSJ framework, then the goal is to produce future graduates who will have the heart for conflict-sensitive journalism.
It was very exciting and very promising. Of all the other professional organizations that I've been part of, I think MEM is the only one distinct kay nasa Mindanao na flavor.
Forming the formation of the organization was very organic because we were so inspired by those 3 days that we were learning all of these principles of, wow, this is conflict. News reporting right now is very violent, so what can we do? Why not let's form a group? Let's formalize this collective of teachers and champion conflict sensitivity in journalism.
Since I was part of the pioneering batch, I became also part of the working committee, doing some things like crafting our constitution and bylaws, all those things.
Back in 2013, integration is the main goal. We will integrate that in journalism subject. But it went beyond that because we see the value of CSJ, not only for a subject, but also for the whole program.
They started with several trainings on CSJ. They really saw the need to come together and learn from each other. Also to overcome this sense of competition between different teachers from different schools.
A facilitator was invited and we were oriented on the things na gusto naming i-craft, no? Saan pupunta yung direksyon ninyo? And so far, so good kasi this time, the result of the constitution and bylaws were somehow a reflection of ano yung gusto naming mangyari as an organization.
So it was really their way of becoming more of a community of practitioners pushing for CSJ.
To me kasi, ang role dapat ng communication teacher is that we don't stop finding alternatives. In that way, ang mga students natin, nagkakaroon din sila, kumbaga, yung idea nila, mas nanadagdagan. It gives additional dun sa tinatawag natin na market of ideas.
CSJ principles and philosophies are very vital in terms of Mindanao context because we see the importance for the future journalists, for example, to really deconstruct the conflict, understand the conflict, and from there, they could write better stories. It was really a struggle because, for one, it's not mainstreamed yet in the past, so you have to really introduce the framework to them, to the policymakers, to the decision makers of the school. Eventually, they were convinced that this is something important. This is something that could help the program and the field as a whole.
And I believe that it really will help us develop smarter, more critical thinking learners, consumers. MEM has been so focused on CSJ training for the past 9 years. And then we just finished an international academic research conference on CSJ when COVID-19 happened. So all of our planned activities, events were on a halt. It was a depressing time, a tragic time for many of us, but it was also a time to look at what is happening in the world. So aside from the pandemic, there was a massive infodemic. Some of us kind of felt like, hey, what are we doing? Why are we not acting on this information crisis that's happening on social media? And realize we cannot solely focus on conflict sensitivity in the academe, in our existing collective, because there is a bigger problem out there.
Then, pagbalik, there was a sort of a revival. We revisited the Constitution and bylaws. Parang hindi na rin ulit siya functional. Kasi nagbago na, hindi na siya conflict-sensitive journalism lang. Kasi hindi naman lahat nagtuturo ng journalism. Any form of communication should be part of that.
So how can MEM help? So that's the time when we had a very productive strategic planning in December 2022. And by January 2023, we opened membership to all the media and communication teachers in Mindanao and even outsiders. No? Kasi gusto namin maka-reach out dun sa mga ibang tao who have a different perception about Mindanao too. We also want to educate them.
I think coming in after the pandemic, we'd like to start anew and come up with more in-person activities and really in hopes of growing our members.
So we just had our very first CSJC training. How is this different from the CSJ training that we have? Well, the C means communication.
My motivation in joining this seminar workshop on CSJC is basically I want to mold students that are conflict-sensitive journalists, and I want to contribute to peace.
Because before, it was focused on journalism. But this time, we're adding communication because we're taking into consideration social media.
Social media blurs the line between truth and fallacy. Especially in the context of the classroom and learning communication, we are actually using social media almost all the time.
We're taking into consideration corporate communication.
And then eventually, we see that the conflict analysis tools can be applied also not only for journalism, but also for organizational development.
We're putting in development communication.
In peace building, CSJ is really important because when you tell the stories of the people that you work with, you have to be sensitive, no? How you present them to the public.
And all other forms of communication, we believe magagamitan ng conflict sensitivity framework.
In CSJ framework, we have established that conflict is really part of life. And in looking at conflict, understanding conflict, we see that communication is like a primary factor in terms of conflict. And that's part of the evolution why we introduced CSJC.
In terms of the issues that are now happening in the Philippines, no, like disinformation and misinformation, and also kaning polarization of different sides on different topics, no, especially on political issues. It's really necessary. There are journalists, there are media practitioners that are bringing in alternative perspectives.
From that perspective, we see that MEM, although involved primarily with CSJ in understanding conflict in Mindanao, we see that there are things or field that we should not disregard or we should not ignore.
Typically, okay, when you're a teacher from Davao, we've had years of being in a political climate where you do not question the authority. But when I started to understand how conflict is supported by systems, by dynasties, and it does not sit well with the new values that I have developed through CSJ, it really became an eye-opener. But that does not happen to all teachers right away. So, yun ang mahirap because even in our group, there are teachers who don't share the same political leanings. But what's great about the framework, we are able to dialogue and to communicate with each other without actually having to hate each other. And that makes for a healthy discourse Because at the end of the day, we're educators. And our job is to help our students do critical thinking.
After going through a lot of conflict sensitivity sessions under FORUMZFD and CSJ is one of those. Siguro sa edad ko na rin, parang together nagmelo yung pananaw ko, nagmelo yung attitude ko, pati behavior. Nagiging ibang tao ako this time, no? Parang ang dami kong pwedeng anong tawag dito? Ma-compromise na mga bagay-bagay na hindi ko ginagawa noon. Isang bagay lang hindi ko pwedeng i-compromise, yung quality ng output. Other things, yung mga submission, marinig ko lang na as long as ano naman siya, yung reasonable, mas nakikinig ako this time, no? Mas sensitive ako sa pangangailangan nila.
There are many organizations already doing this advocacy, but we were in a very strategic position being in Mindanao because there's a big gap in Mindanao. Ang daming teachers dito, ang daming hindi trained. So, MEM found that opportunity to provide those trainings. Media literacy, film literacy, fact-checking, lahat yan. Last Mindanao Week of Peace, we brought in 2 films from the collection of the long reach of short films produced by FORUMZFD. So these films were Under the Canopy of Light by Teng Mangansakan and Panikupan by Magani Feola. These short films elicited actually very remarkable emotions from the audience.
Through the films that have been shown, I can see that there can be change, there can be hope. So given the framework itself, it has given me a different approach on how I call myself to action. It gives a more sensitive narration of how Muslims or Moros, indigenous people, and Christians live in harmony. Because that's something that hasn't been the narrative for years.
MEM was formed, it became an organized network. We are now teaching the 4th batch of teachers on CSJ. You can really see that so many milestones have been reached.
So 2023 was a transition stage. This is when we started to try out different things aside from conflict sensitivity. We tackled climate change, media information literacy, expanded that into film literacy. That's why we have this well as a leader right now. We're also looking into fact-checking, Mindanao history. So we're looking at all different potential program areas already beyond CSJ. We're forming a new core group because we're going to carry out now very wonderful plans for 2024 and really need to solidify the officers and the programs and basically the organization.
For us in FORUMZFD, we see it as a very important time of transitioning, in a way handing over this work on CSJ to our partner, MEM, because we're really seeing the potential that they have as a homegrown organization pushing for CSJ.
Ironically, when we started, there were no members in conflict areas. We were mostly teachers coming from Davao region. And to be honest, hindi naman tayo talaga exposed sa actual conflict and violence. So that's why we had to contextualize first, what do we mean by conflict and violence? It's about structural violence and cultural violence, meaning the social injustices, the inequality that's happening in our immediate communities. With this lens, mas naintindihan ko yung political, economic, social, cultural aspects of a social issue.
Sana nakita ng lahat na ito yung sense of accountability and responsibility na binibigay ni MEM through the conflict-sensitive journalism and communication.
Malaki yung impact ng program actually. Kasi yung mga tao natin ngayon, mas nagiging mapagbantay na sila. Yung CSJ nagiging guiding principles na nila to explain certain things, no? Lalo na sa social media.
I think that's the essence of CSJ, that you're able to understand people better and not just know a single story of that person or that group. CSJC is key in terms of addressing prejudices among people.
But this time, we want to be more assertive with our conversations. So MEM is very active in raising our hand. Hello, we're MEM. We're here. We exist. Okay. After 10 years, no, we say we exist in this broad spectrum of advocates for media literacy and fact-checking. social justice and peace. We are here, and we're here to give our voice. So we had this training in October, and we're very excited with this new breed of members because they're coming from places wherein we don't have memberships yet before, such as Marawi. Okay? And we're now activating a lot of members in Cagayan de Oro. And then we expect to even expand more. And by the looks of their faces, they're very excited. And then I recall how I was so wide-eyed 10 years ago when I first learned this framework.
And for me, as part of MEM, I say that the dynamics that we have, the evolutions that we are undergoing right now is also part of not only professional level but also of personal level.
It's a good thing na may MEM kasi this time meron na tayong isang organization na particular sa mga usaping pangkapayapaan dadalhin sa mga issue ng kapayapaan sa Mindanao dadalhin in the national forum, no?
And yes, so there's really a huge room for everybody in MEM and a huge room for media education in Mindanao.
And I hope that 10 years from now, they'll be sitting here in this chair and be telling that exact same story as I am telling right now. A story of how we're able to mainstream CSJC and make MEM a very important player in making sure that we transform Mindanao into the Mindanao that we want.